Well, hello there, everybody. It's good to see you on this Friday morning. We are about to talk about the Parashat Hashavua, which is the Torah portion of the week. And this week, the Torah portion is Metzora. And Metzora flies kind of in tandem with Tazria. Sometimes they're put together, Tazria, Metzora. We happen to be in a leap year where we read them separately because we've got 13 months instead of 12 months this year. Isn't that exciting? So, well, I'm excited anyway. I'll be excited for the both of us. What we're about to do is do a live studio recording for the Jew Curious Show podcast. So if you're coming in looking for a summary of Metzora or a pithy lesson in 2 minutes or less, this is not that. There are plenty of other rabbis doing that on YouTube. For our purposes, we're going to have a bit of a longer discussion. And what I love about doing it on Facebook Live is making it a real discussion. So if you are watching right now, jump into the chat. Not really seeing any chat happening. Oh, there it is. Thought the chat was broken. Kathy's coming in from Southern California, and I'm sure many more will follow. So we're about to have a little bit longer discussion. I've got some things that I want to share on the Torah portion this week, specifically on the first part of the Torah portion, where it talks about this, I'm just going to say it, bizarre ritual where you take two birds, like a pigeon or a dove or something, and some cedar wood and a red thread and a bowl of water, and one of the birds makes it. I'll put it that way. The other bird does not. And we do this in order to mark the transition of somebody who's had all these skin afflictions that we're talking about, and going from, really not ready, as Rabbi Sarah Tasman says, for participating in the holy community, transitioning to being ready to participating in the holy community. And we do this really intricate ritual that doesn't, I'm going to say on the face of it, make a lot of sense. Like, why do we do this? And you could ask that question about a lot of things we do in Judaism. So we're going to get into that today. But first, again, just to prepare you, if you haven't been to one of these before, this is going to be a live studio recording of a podcast episode. God willing, we'll get this out on the airwaves on the Jew Curious Show podcast, available on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Google Play, all the places, all the things. But so you're going to hear me do some radio announcery stuff just to intro the show so I can record it right here. And we're going to have some shout outs for the people in the chat. So if you want to get a shout out, make sure you identify yourself in the chat. We're already seeing a lot of people show up right now. Excited to see some familiar faces, and wonder if we'll see some new faces today. There's maybe a name in there I don't recognize quite yet, but I do have a terrible memory, so we'll rectify that. So what we're going to do right now, I'm going to record the intro to the podcast and put on my podcasty voice, if you'll allow me, do a little Ron Burgundy warm up. Red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather, unique New York, unique New York. Unique New York. She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore. Rubber baby buggy bumpers. So that's how, just make sure I can say all the words before we get started. And here we go. Hero, if you've read the Torah, and if you haven't, I highly encourage you to, you may have come across some stuff that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, or you might scratch your head and say, why do we do that? Or why did they do that back then? You may think of some things that Jewish people do now as a little bit bizarre, like not eating certain animals, or having rituals that involve putting a scroll up on your doorpost and kissing it when you walk through the door. There are all sorts of things that we do as Jews that do make sense, like forbidding murder and having some things that are very logical, and some things that seem to defy logic and in some cases even common sense. Today, we're going to talk about the difference between those two kinds of things that we do, and why I'm going to ask you to take a second look at the things that may, on the surface, make no sense. And we're going to get into that right after this bass. Do a little silence recording here. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Joey Weissenberg and the Hadar Ensemble, for those inspiring opening beats. Thank you so much to the live studio audience that has joined thank you so much to the live studio audience who has joined us here on YouTube for this discussion of Parashat Metzora, the Torah portion of the week. And most of all, thank you, Hero, for listening to the Jew Curious Show. If this is your first time here, you might wonder, am I in the right place even? And I'll say, if you are curious about Judaism, you absolutely are, wherever you're coming from. If you're considering conversion, if you're actively planning for conversion to Judaism, if you've been Jewish your whole life, but there are some things that you don't understand that you would like to understand. If you're dedicated in your practice to another religion altogether, if you're dedicated in your religious practice to another, if you're dedicated in your practice of another religion altogether, but you're curious about the Hebrew roots of your tradition, or if you're just a spiritual seeker trying on a few different things to see which one is right for you, you absolutely belong here, and I am delighted to learn with you today. I'm going to take another silent sprint. This is another podcasty thing because my air conditioner just kicked on. I want to make sure I capture that static that we did out earlier. And because this is a live studio recording, I want to give some shout outs to the people who have joined us here live. We have just made Minyan. We have 10 people here. So I'm going to say hello to Kathy from Southern California. Teresa is here from Cyprus. That is not just a tree. That is a country on the other side of the world, y'all. And so I'm always delighted to learn with Teresa. Teresa is an old friend of the Jew Curious community. Susan Bird is here from sunny Florida. Do we have any other Floridians in the house? I'm pretty sure we do. William is saying good Shabbos to everybody. Anna, what is it? Anna Ellizinger here. Anna Ellizinger is here from California. I don't know that I've seen you here before. If I have, I'm so sorry that I have forgotten. I forget lots of stuff, but I'm delighted that you're here with us today. Ari says, good Shabbos, Ari. And yes, in fact, we have William from Waukesha Springs, Florida, another Floridian, another Florida man, which I'm sure there are lots of really good ones. Forget about the stuff they're saying about Florida men these days. I learn with lots of Florida men, and they are delightful and earnest in their scholarship. Val is also coming in from Florida. Let's see. Welcome, Carmen, who says, Buen dia a todos. G'day to all from Henderson, Nevada. And so glad to learn with everybody here in the live studio audience. We are coming up on Pesach, y'all. I don't know if you knew about this, but Passover is coming. I will say, if at all possible, find yourself a seat at a Seder for Passover. This is the single most popular Jewish ritual there is in terms of the percentage of Jewish people who partake in this ritual every year. Something like 70% of Jewish people in America, let's say, because that's where the survey was done, go to a Seder for Passover every year. That far outstrips the percentage of people who, let's say, fast for Yom Kippur, light candles on Friday nights, things like that. There's just something about Passover that draws people in. And I'll say, if you're watching this, if you're listening to this and you're wondering, hey, I'm not Jewish, or not yet, can I attend a Passover Seder? You absolutely can. In fact, the Passover Seder was my introduction to Judaism. I was in a relationship with a Jewish woman, later in a family with that Jewish woman, and she invited me to her family's Seder. That was probably the first sort of Jewish ritual that I participated in, and I know that's true for a lot of people, and I guess it stuck. and I think I've probably taken it a bit too far, becoming a rabbi. You don't have to do that to enjoy Jewish life. I just say it beats working for a living. I'll put it that way. Miriam is here from New Hampshire. So delighted to see everybody. And let's see what we got. We got a couple of questions in the audience already. Why is this Shabbat called Shabbat Hagadol? This is the one of the special Shabbatot leading up to Passover. The last Shabbat before Passover is called Shabbat Hagadol. I think perhaps because of the length of the Torah reading, but also because this is considered a great Shabbat. This is the final Shabbat before Passover starts. There has been a tradition throughout history that on Shabbat Hagadol, the rabbi preaching in a synagogue would give perhaps his or her longest sermon of the year. So they said, it's Shabbat HaGadol. I'll give a Gadol sermon, a big sermon. And so there's a friend of mine named Norman who likes to go to synagogues, likes to actually go to different synagogues from his own synagogue to hear different people preach, because that's when rabbis traditionally give longer than usual sermons in many places. So we've got several Shabbatot leading up to Pesach. We had Shabbat Parah, the Sabbath of the cow, where we tell the story of the some say the red heifer, the Parah Hadumah. This was a special procedure to help purify people who were in a state of ritual impurity so that they were able to participate in Passover. And that's really related to today's topic. We're talking about a specific ritual that's mentioned in the beginning of Parashat Metzora to help people who are in a state of ritual impurity, or called tameh, transition to becoming tahor. And very soon on the Jew Curious Show podcast, you're going to hear from my friend, my teacher, my fellow Rabbis Without Borders fellow, Rabbi Sarah Tasman, who gave me a really great insight on this notion of tameh and tahor. When we read about it in the Torah, it often says unclean and clean, or impure and pure. And how she recasts that is, let's say, ready and not ready, or not ready and ready, right? We are either ready for full participation in the holy community, or we're not ready, right? And sometimes we come in contact with things, impurities in the world. Let's say we have to bury a loved one, God forbid, and we come in contact with a dead body, and that kind of sets us aside from the community for a little bit. But there are certain things in life which, let's say, come in front of our ability to participate in holy service, and that's okay. Judaism recognizes that you don't always have your head in the game. There's a couple of different occasions on which you're not supposed to, or not expected to, pray in the community. One of those is, let's say, on your wedding night. It says in the Mishnah, if a groom has just gotten married and has not yet consummated that relationship, he is not required to show up for shul. In fact, he's expected not to, right? You spend that time with your spouse until such time as you have fully celebrated your marriage, let's say, by consummating that relationship, and then you can rejoin the holy community, because we just assume that your head is not fully in the game. You've got another game that you've got to have your head in, and another moment in which we're not considered responsible for praying in the community is when someone has just passed away, who is close to us. And our primary responsibility is really about putting that person to rest as quickly, but also as honorably as possible. And so it is unreasonable to expect that that person could join the community in prayer with full presence and intention. So these aren't bad things, right? Celebrating a marriage, honoring a loved one who has passed, these are good things that take us out of the game of holy service. And so I really like how Rabbi Tasman casts that as, okay, not ready for holy service, and then you're ready again, right? Then you're back in the normal flow of things. But to get there, specifically in a condition of tza'arat, if you're a Metzora, if you are someone who has one of these flaky skin conditions that they talk about for the last couple of parshiot, and once this is cleared up, And you go to the priest, and the priest performs this certain ritual that marks that transition to now ready again to rejoin the holy community. But I'm going to just say that this ritual is kind of weird, right? What we do, and when I say we do, I'll say what they did in the time of the Torah, because we don't do animal sacrifices these days. Just to clear that up for anybody right now, if you think Jews still do animal sacrifices because you read about that in the quote-unquote Old Testament or the Torah, or wherever you read it, we are not biblical Jews today. We are rabbinic Jews today, and so we don't sacrifice animals anymore. But back when we did, and someone was in this transitory phase, the priest would take a pigeon and then another pigeon and a big bowl of water, like an earthen vessel of water, and some cedar wood, and the stuff that's translated as crimson stuff, or we think it was probably a red thread. So when you go to the Kabbalah Center, or people are trying to tie a red thread around your wrist for some tzedakah or something, there's a few different places in the Torah where it describes something being done with a red thread, and that kind of caught on. So you take a red thread and a couple of birds and some cedar wood, and then you kill one of the birds, you shecht it, and you put its blood into the bowl of water, and then you take the live pigeon and the cedar wood and the red thread, presumably binding these things together, and you dip them in the, let's say, red water that we now have, and you sprinkle that on the former site of the skin affliction that had taken the person out of holy service. And then once that's been done, the person then shaves off all the hair on their body, including their eyebrows, which I know take a long time to grow back, but this was pretty serious. And then they would, bathe, and then wait a period of time, and then they could resume holy service. And this is a bit of a head scratcher. I'm not going to lie to you. And it also reminds me of another part in the Torah that comes up in about, I think about 4 chapters, right? We're in about 4 chapters from now. We're going to get into some other procedures of Yom Kippur, as was defined in the Torah back when they were first starting all of this stuff. And there's a procedure by which Aharon, or the high priest that succeeds him, in preparation for Yom Kippur, would take 2 goats, and they would draw lots, or draw straws between these 2 goats to pick which one would have which job in this ritual, and one goat would be sacrificed. The other goat, the goat that lives, oh, and I forgot to mention about the 2 birds thing. The bird that lives, it sounds a little like Harry Potter right now, the boy who lived. The bird that lived after this ritual would be set free, just to fly off wherever it wanted. It's been through enough, honestly. But that other bird would be set free. In the ritual with the 2 goats, one goat is slaughtered. The other goat, Aharon, or Aaron, the high priest that succeeded him, would put his hands on the top of the head of the goat and do this massive confession, just recounting all the sins of the people Israel. And I don't know if he'd get specific and list. There's one time that Bob got a parking ticket, right? Or there's one time that Steve over there, was messing around with somebody he should have been messing with. I think it's probably more like a collective confession. God, please, for all of the things that we have done wrong, and maybe list a few categories. But he would do this while putting his hands on the head of this goat. Thereby, one might presume, transfer the sins into this goat and then chase it off into the wilderness. And it says in the Torah, send it into the wilderness for Azazel. And there's some speculation as to who this Azazel character is. Is it just is Azazel the name of the reason why he sent it out there? Is Azazel the name of a demon that lives in the wilderness and likes to eat goats that are full of sins, I guess? Eating sin goat, yum, delicious. I don't know. I can't speak for Azazel. But when we get to that Torah portion, we'll speculate on who or what Azazel was. My point is that we've got these 2 different rituals where a pair of animals are taken. One is sacrificed and the other one is set free. And we don't know why, right? Maybe it's the transference of guilt or the transference of illness into a creature that's then sent into the wilderness, thus extracting it from its source. This is also where the word scapegoat comes up from, by the way. Like, he took all the sins of Israel, put them on the goat, and chased it away. And a scapegoat in modern parlance is, you pick somebody, or you pick something, pick some concept or a person and say, everything that's wrong with us, we're going to blame it on that guy, because it makes it easier for us to get through the day, to absolve our guilt by blaming it on somebody else or placing it on somebody else and letting them suffer for it. So the irony is not lost on me that it's, the Torah where we get the term scapegoat, and how the Jewish people have been scapegoated throughout history. When empires are falling, when they're crumbling, when there's hyperinflation in Weimar Germany, whenever it's convenient for an empire to not own up to its own responsibilities, they place responsibility for their suffering on us, and we are treated as the scapegoat. So we gave the term to the world, and look where it got us. However, the good news is we've outlasted every single one of those empires who have attempted to scapegoat us. So, I'll set my triumphalism aside for right now, but just talk about these two rituals. And the rabbis pick up on this because they were human, and they were coming up with the discussions that would later be put in the Mishnah and the Talmud, 1,000 or 2 years after we get this ritual in the Torah, and they're thinking, like, what is this? Like, really? That's how we get rid of skin afflictions, is by killing a bird and setting another one free? That's really how nationally we become absolved, by sending a goat off into the wilderness? That defies common sense, or it defies our observations of the observable world. Why is that in the Torah? And they resolve this, the rabbis of our tradition resolve this by taking a look at a passage. I think it's, I want to say it's Vayikra 18, verse 4, where God says, you will do my laws, and you will keep my statutes faithfully. I am the Lord your God. And it uses two different words for, laws and statutes. One is mishpatim, these are the laws, and chukim, which are the statutes. And then it concludes with this phrase, I am the Lord your God. And the rabbi said, well, why use, we've got this list of 613 commandments. We're not really encouraged to differentiate between them. Like, they're all kind of on par. It says in Pirkei Avot, don't be so sure of what you consider a major mitzvah versus a minor mitzvah, because it's not on you to keep count. Like, you should do minor mitzvot, as in your estimation, with as much earnestness and zeal as you do major mitzvot. Right? And certainly there are some major mitzvot, right? We'll think about the 10 commandments. That's kind of our top 10 list of commandments to keep. And then there's stuff like don't plow with an ox and a donkey together. And you look at that and you're like, you set that aside, you set that next to, thou shalt not murder. And one of these things is not like the other. Like, one just seems a little bit picayune. One seems, well, almost duh, like I would have come up with that myself. And the rabbis had the exact same insight. They said, like, look, why does God give us two different words for things that God has told us to do? Mishpatim and chukim. And they said, okay, this must be sort of two different categories within the same universe of mitzvot. Mishpatim are the laws which we probably would have figured out anyway, right? These are things that are reasonable, they are logical, they are natural for maintaining an orderly society. Don't murder, don't kidnap, don't covet, don't blaspheme, right? Even though that we're getting that from God, what if you're worshiping a God, don't, talk trash about that God. That's just wise. That's just logical. We could have figured that out on our own, right? Don't worship idols, right? So much of our trouble was from idolatry, and we have this new way of doing things, of worshiping a God without making statues of that God, or worshiping inanimate objects or nature or what have you. We could have figured that out on our own, right? And then there are those things that make less obvious sense. There's a commandment that you shall not wear a garment of mixed fibers. It's called shatnez, right? You don't wear a garment where linen and wool, for example, are mixed together. Fun fact, that's actually related to the donkey and the cow pulling the plow thing. You don't similarly don't plant two different kinds of crops in the same row, right? We should have different areas for different kinds of crops. And none of this stuff is obvious. And a couple of more, ones we've already just talked about, included in the same list. And I think you could find this in Masechet Yoma, I want to say 67b. It's either 67a or 67b, but they talk about this in Masechet Yoma, which is about Yom Kippur. And it's on Yom Kippur that we talk about this two-goat and Azazel thing. So when they're discussing this, they say, okay, this phrase in the Torah, Leviticus 18:4, keep my laws and my statutes, I am the Lord your God. And so they parse this verse and they say the laws are the things that we could have come up with anyway. These are things that God gave to us to do that also adhere to apparent natural law of an ordered society, right? But God also says, keep my hukim, or hukotai, like keep my statutes. God must be talking about those things that God asks us to do that make no obvious sense, right? And it lists specifically in the Talmud there the two-bird thing in this Parsha Rachiar, and the two-goat thing in reference to the scapegoat on Yom Kippur. It lists not eating pork, right? Which is sort of a stand-in for like all of kashrut, right? Some people scratch their heads all the time and wonder, what's with the dietary laws? Can't I be a good person and still have a ham sandwich? Can't I be a good person and still eat shrimp? This makes no sense to me. Maybe it made sense to them back then because poor refrigeration technology and trichinosis and all that stuff, but it makes no sense today, so I'm going to dispense with it. But what the rabbis are saying, God gives us two different kinds of laws to say the logical and the illogical, and caps off that phrase with, I am the Lord your God, right? Just to make it clear why we do the things that apparently have no reason. And I'll rephrase, and I don't like casting God in the masculine or parental role at all times, but it sounds to me like back when I used to hear, because I'm your father and I said so, right? Sometimes when you're, and I thought, man, I'm never going to say that. That just seems really like a terrible way to parent. And then I became one and found myself saying things like that all the time. Look, I don't have time to explain it to you. Don't punch your sister in the neck. I'll explain later, but really right now what I need to happen is no neck punching. And you'll get it when you're older, right? But really in this moment, don't play in traffic. Why? I like traffic. Because I'll tell you after you get out of traffic, right? Or we give our kids instructions or people in our charge instructions that we don't have time to explain. Maybe they don't have the emotional, intellectual, or spiritual maturity to even understand if we try to explain it to them. But for right now, we just give them things that are good for them. Right. So again, this verse, keep my laws and my statutes, I am the Lord your God, is to say, what we have here is what I like to call a portfolio of commitments that comes with a covenant. Right. When you have that relationship with God and you're a part of this covenant that has defined Judaism since Abraham, with that relationship comes responsibilities. And some of those responsibilities are readily apparent, and some of them are not. Some of the things we do as Jews, we do out of reason, right? Don't murder people is a reasonable request, right? That is not a way to have a stable, peaceful society going around murdering folks, right? And that's why that law is in among the 7 Noachide laws, and kind of an immediate rule number 1 of most civil societies. But sometimes we don't do things for reason. We do things for the relationship, right? I don't do this because I understand why I do this. I do this because I'm in a relationship with a God and a people where this is how we behave. This is just understood as the right way to behave within this relationship. Let me give you a perhaps somewhat trivial example. So I like to grill. I grill quite a bit. I'm not bragging. I'm just saying I like to grill. I live in Southern California, where it's easy to be outside most of the year. Also, it gets very hot, and it's hard when you're living in an apartment or a house, when you got to cook. When you cook inside, it heats up the place when it's like 110 degrees outside, and you don't want to be cooking in the house. It's easier to go outside in the heat, grill, leave the heat out there, and bring in some delicious grilled food. And if there are any vegetarians out there, I'm about to grill a vegetable, so hang in there. So I grill probably 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 nights a week. And when I'm grilling, my wife will say, throw some eggplant on there. Right? And we have like a constant, steady supply of eggplant. There's always an eggplant in our refrigerator because my wife loves grilled eggplant. I despise eggplant in most forms. And there's nothing to get. Don't be mailing me eggplants. I don't want to hear from the eggplant lobby on this one. It's just not for me. Right? I don't like the texture. I don't like the flavor. Except when I grill it, I'll eat like the burned pieces because it tastes like burned stuff, and not because it tastes like eggplant. But whenever I'm grilling, I grill eggplant. And my wife is the only person in the house who eats it. The kids don't eat it. I don't eat it. It takes 20 minutes to grill eggplant, how I do it anyway. And, I could be putting more burgers on there, right? I like burgers and chicken and hot dogs and stuff like that. But no, I'm going to actually start 20 minutes earlier to grill this eggplant. Not because I like eggplant, or because I understand that it's good for me in some way, if you're not allergic to nightshades or however that works. But I grill it every single time because I love my wife. And I will take that extra step to make something that I don't eat and that nobody else in the family eats. But because I like her to be, I like to witness the happiness, the smile on her face when she enjoys grilled eggplant. There are things we do for reasons, and there are things we do for relationships. And that's the lesson for me from Parashat Metzora and other places like that. Don't eat pork. Don't mix your wool and linen fibers. There's a scapegoat thing on Yom Kippur. And we put 2 birds together to mark this transition from not ready to participate in the community to ready to participate in the community. Why? Because it's important to mark that transition, and our relationship with God dictates that that's how we do that thing. And so when you're looking at various things in the Torah, and especially if you're new to Jewish life or deepening your Jewish observance, you will probably hear people say things like, well, I keep the ethical commandments, but not the ritual commandments, right? Or I do the things that make sense to me. I don't do the things that don't make sense to me. And I'm not going to criticize that move necessarily of picking and choosing. I've heard this people called cafeteria Catholics and Jews. We have a version of that as well. And I'll say further that everybody does it. If somebody tells you they're keeping all 613 of the commandments, they are either misled themselves or are misleading you, because you literally cannot keep all 613 of the commandments. I've talked about that elsewhere. Everybody, no matter what their portfolio of observance, is in a negotiation between what the tradition demands of us and the human lives that we live, the relationships that we're in, the city that we live in. Do we even have access to a synagogue, right? Or is there a mitzvah that if I did this mitzvah, it would annoy my wife so much that it might impair the mitzvah of being married to her, right? So everybody is in a negotiation. Everybody is picking and choosing. So I try not to judge people who are making different decisions from me, and I'll encourage everybody out there, don't be so quick to judge when people are picking and choosing, because everybody's doing it, right? But I will say, as long as you are picking and choosing, there are those things which will come easy for you, and those things which will not come as easy for you, especially when they defy your reason, defy your observations of the world. What I want to say is, take a look at some of those things that may seem ridiculous and try them on, right? Maybe for a week, maybe for a couple of days, maybe once. Try something, even though it doesn't seem to make logical sense, because I want to encourage you not to discount those things that we do for the sake of relationship versus the sake of reason. There are some things in Judaism that are just plain tribal. We have the 12 tribes. I get to use that word. There are some things that are tribal. And as Seth Godin describes tribal behavior, people like us do things like this. This is how we distinguish ourselves. This is how we identify other people like us and let them know that we are like them. Sometimes it feels like it's excluding people, but that's okay to an extent, because that defines who your people are, and that is a good thing because it binds those people together and allows us to support each other in ways that we couldn't if we didn't have an identifiable community. So I really wanted to encourage everybody out there, when you're reading, especially Leviticus, dude. Leviticus is hard. Leviticus is about skin conditions and killing animals. I know we have a lot of vegans who are watching this. I know I have a lot of vegans who are listening to this podcast. And I'm just going to ask you to sort of suspend your judgment of a different time and place and understand that what people have been trying to do, we're doing then, are still doing now, is negotiating, doing those things in their life, which they do because it makes all sorts of sense. And we are strengthened by God saying, yes, it makes sense, and also it's important to me, so please do these things. But I want to encourage you to try the weird. Try those commandments which don't make logical sense to you and see how it feels. See how it maybe makes you feel more connected to other people trying these things. Because in my mind, doing things for the sake of relationship can be at least as powerful, as beneficial, and as spiritually uplifting as doing those things which we do, which are logical. That's what I wanted to give you from Parashat Metzora this week. There's a lot of more scaly skin and house mold and discharges and stuff, but even buried in this bizarre ritual of 2 birds, a red thread, cedar, and some water and some sprinkling and stuff, we can learn about how to conduct our lives. At least that's what I take away from it. So thank you for learning this with me today. I'm going to take a look at the chat, and I've been talking for a little while, but I want to take a look at what questions people have. I think Daniel had asked about Shabbat Hagadol. It's just big Shabbos. There's long reading, there's long sermons. I'm going to scroll up to the top. This is bad radio right now, but I'll delete this part later. Kathy is asking, what is different about the Shabbat service before Passover? I mean, so right now we're about to have a Shabbat service, which in many ways is identical to a regular Friday evening service, but the Friday evening service is going to take place on the Friday evening service is going to take place on when it's already Passover. And so it's going to be mostly the same. There will be perhaps some additions in the Amidah. If you take a look at the Amidah, there are often additions when it's a festival and things like that. One thing that will be different is when you light candles, because when you light candles this Friday night, normally when we light candles, we bless God for the mitzvah lahadlik ner shel Shabbat, to the mitzvah of lighting the lights for Shabbat, and you add like a word, right? You instead of saying Baruch atah Hashem, etc., lahadlik ner shel Shabbat, you say Lahadlik ner shel Shabbat v'yom tov, right? Because you're lighting the candles both for Friday night, but also for the holiday or Yom Tov, good day of Pesach. So that's a little bit different. When you make Kiddush in the evening, similarly, normally when you make Kiddush in the beginning of Passover, there's a special Kiddush for Passover, like celebrating what we call Zman Cherutenu, right? The season of our liberation. But if you look in your Haggadah, if people are reading the Haggadah to say the blessing for Kiddush for Passover, you add a few words because it's Shabbat, right? We're making Kiddush not just like we're lighting candles, not just for Shabbat, but also for the holiday. In the Kiddush, we're making Kiddush for the holiday, but also for Shabbat. And then when we do Birkat Hamazon after the Passover meal, we have a special Birkat Hamazon for Passover, but if it's also on Shabbat, we mention the fact that it's Shabbat. So again, 90% the same, 95, 99% the same, but be on the lookout in the Siddur, in the prayer book, and also in the Haggadah, the booklet we use for the order of the Passover feast. Just watch those for things in parentheses and says insert Shabbat stuff here. So keep an eye out for that. I will say if you normally attend services on Friday night, you might want to check in with your synagogue to make sure they're having Friday night services. Where I am working right now in Pasadena, Jewish Temple and Center, we normally would have Friday night services, but because Friday night is the first Seder, and we assume and would like to encourage as many people as possible to attend Passover Seders, we're not having our normal Friday night services. So just keep an eye out for that. Let's see. Get a lot of good Shabbos and Shalom. Carmen, you'll have to teach me how to do the upside down exclamation points and question marks. Back when I was learning Spanish, I wasn't doing a lot of Spanish typing, so I didn't know how to do that stuff. Now I'm learning how to type in Hebrew, or I've learned how to type in Hebrew, but I don't know how to do like enyes and the upside down exclamation points. So I'd love to learn how to do that. Let's see. Miriam in New Hampshire was looking for a Seder, says the only thing here is Chabad. I don't think I can go there though. That's entirely up to you. That's between you and Chabad. Chabad will often host a Passover Seder for the sake of people who don't have one. And I'm always reminded that the single largest Passover Seder in the entire world, just about every year, takes place in Kathmandu, in the country of Nepal. And it takes place under the auspices of Chabad of Kathmandu, and I think that's probably because there's a lot of Israelis and Jews of all stripes who go to Kathmandu, whether just to experience that beautiful country. I've been there once myself, and I highly recommend it. Or a lot of times people get out of the army in Israel, out of their compulsory military service, and they go to places like India, or they go to Nepal to maybe hike part of the Himalayas or something like that. And so recognizing this, the Chabad of Kathmandu rents out a hotel and will do a Passover Seder for something like 2,000 people every year. So if you're in Kathmandu on Passover, I highly recommend you checking that out. Chabad is for some people, Chabad is not for some people, but you do you and figure that out. Let's see. People are sort of discussing Chabad etiquette. That's a thing. Ari shares another option for a Passover Seder is finding your local Hillel organization. Hillel is a college outreach organization. They provide Jewish services, and when I say services, not just prayer services, but also pastoral services and learning opportunities and things like that for Jewish kids on college campuses. But I'll say you don't necessarily have to be a kid. A lot of Hillel organizations on college campuses will host a Passover Seder for the sake of the kids who can't make it back home for Passover, and I would imagine those are probably open to the community as well. So again, I think I said this yesterday, but I highly encourage people to attend a Passover Seder with other people. If you are, on a boat in the ocean by yourself or something, you can't be around other people, it's absolutely okay to do, to make a Seder by yourself. It's far preferable to be with other people. And I would say, if you can, go to somebody's home. Just because Passover was, again, the first lesson for me that Judaism isn't something that just happens in a synagogue. It pervades our lives, and just about anything you can do on a holy occasion, you can do in your own home. And I like to reinforce that idea, so I encourage people to go to people's homes for Seders if possible. If not possible, there are lots of synagogues, hillels, organizations that will host a Seder for the sake of people who, just want to be there or don't have another Seder to go to. So please take advantage of that opportunity. If anybody is in, let's say, the east side of Los Angeles area, Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center is hosting a community Seder that is open to everyone, and all you have to do is RSVP just so they can roll out the right number of matzah balls for you. But go check that out if you're looking for a Seder on the second night of Passover. Just a second, I'm going to top off the rocket fuel here. Miriam from New Hampshire is looking at possibly Dartmouth. I believe my son was part of the Dartmouth Hillel as well. Let's see. Miriam asks, are birds kosher? Many birds are kosher. Specifically, the birds that we were talking about today, the 2 birds that are used for this ritual, are to be kosher birds, and they specify, like pigeons or turtle doves or something like that. If you look back, I believe we had this a couple of Parashat ago. There's like a long list in Leviticus of animals that you can eat and animals that you can't eat. The kinds of land animals that you can eat are things with a split hoof and chew their cud, like cows and goats and sheep and stuff. We don't eat pigs because they have a split hoof but don't chew their cud. We don't eat camels because they chew their cud but don't have a split hoof. Elephants kind of fall into that category, although I do love the joke or wise saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. But if you're Jewish, don't eat it because it's not kosher. Let's say. But then it lists the kinds of fish that you can eat. The fish with fins and scales you can. The fish that don't have fins and scales, which include things like sharks and catfish and eels, and includes all the shellfish out there. Don't eat those things. And then it gets into the birds. And with the birds, it does more of a listing of species from which we derive generalities. The other ones, we got generalities from which we derive the specific. For birds, we have specifics from which we derive generalities, lists things like owls and ospreys and eagles and falcons. And the generality that we derive is that we don't eat birds that are primarily predatory, right? That their diet mainly consists of, let's say, other birds or other animals and things like that. Chickens are okay. Geese, turkeys. In fact, Israel is far and away the number 1 per capita consuming country of turkey birds. So I was going to say Turkey, not Turkey the country, but Israelis per person eat more turkey every year than any other country, including the United States. It's like far outstrips the United States and then every other country besides that. So turkeys are absolutely kosher, or at least I hope so. And you might think, okay, chickens and turkeys will sometimes eat like little bugs and stuff off the ground, but they're not primarily predators. So the kinds of birds that are kosher are primarily birds that eat grains and things like that, maybe have a little bit of variety of worms and grubs and stuff. But we don't eat birds that eat other birds, essentially. Like we don't eat owls, and we don't eat falcons. That's just a good safety measure, kind of like no sharks. I think it's just good policy not to try to eat a shark because the tables may turn. But those are in Leviticus. It talks about the birds that are kosher, and says it again later. Let's see. Miriam shares, love the story where Abraham destroyed his father's idols and blamed it on the one he left alone. Yes, this is a midrash. It's not in the Torah itself. Many people think it is because it's such a popular story. But there is a midrash on why Abraham merited to have that relationship with God that he did. And it said when he was a young man, he worked in his father's store, and his father was in the idol business, right, making idols for people to worship. And again, this goes into the mishpatim, the logical rules, and how idolatry falls into that. What he did was somebody came in and made an offering to one of the idols in the store. So what Abraham did was he took that offering, put it in front of the largest idol, and put a stick in the hand of that idol, and then smashed all the other idols in the shop. And when his father came back from an errand and saw that all the idols in the shop were broken, except the one biggest one with a stick who had the offering in front of him, the father said, "What did you do? You've destroyed our business. Like, what happened here?" And Abraham said, no, this lady came in and made an offering to one of the smaller idols. Well, the bigger idol was not going to have that, picked up a stick and smashed all of the other idols and took the offering. And his father said, "That's ridiculous. These are just statues." And Abraham replied, "Aha." Right? You admitted that it is absolutely illogical to worship these inanimate things, and you've just admitted to that. So he got in a little trouble. He got chased off to live with his uncle, and that's a whole other story. Boy, this is a big question, but I better not shy away from it. Fernando F. asks, what happens when science and religion clash? What should we do? So they apparently do all the time. We have stories from the Torah that would indicate that the earth is approximately 5,776 years old. Doesn't mention dinosaurs, for which we have fossil record. All sorts of things. When we talk about, especially we talk about Passover and what it means for bread to be leavened or unleavened. And they say, well, it's okay to eat bread where the flour and the water just mix for 18 minutes or less. If you leave it longer than that, it starts to bubble. And that's what causes, what causes leavening is just flour and water mixed together. And they didn't really understand the biochemistry of yeast. And it was the wild yeasts in the area that would get into that mixture and ferment it and cause the bread to rise. And so a lot of our rules sort of ignore that. And so there are all sorts of places where our present understanding of how physics, biology, psychology, how all sorts of things work, sometimes are at odds with an earlier understanding of those things. And what has always attracted to me, what has always been attractive about Judaism to me, is that it doesn't try to drive these things apart to create it as an either-or situation, right? We were given reason and understanding by God in whose image we were created. Are we not supposed to use them, right? Are we not supposed to understand our world better so that we can steward the world better as we were instructed to do in Genesis? And even in very religious settings, you've got really punctilious Orthodox Jewish doctors who have to study biology and evolutionary biology to understand how human beings work in order to heal them. And from a long time ago, at least in the time of the Talmud, where it's saying, really, 5776, like that's how old the world is? 6 days to create an entire universe, really? And the rabbis just concluded, look, their days were not like our days, right? When we think of 6 days, we think of 6 discrete periods of 24 hours each that contain 60 minutes, that contain 60 seconds, etc. And this is just talking about a sunrise and a sunset. These are talking about eras which could have taken place over a long period of time, and some of these we can understand metaphorically. So even in the time of the Talmud, they questioned this annus mundi calculation, this, how old is the world? We've got a demarcation of 5,779 years based on counting up genealogies and things like that. But 1,500, 2,000 years ago, our sages understood it could be longer. And when something is evident to your senses, don't discount that. God gave you those senses. And my feeling has always been, insofar as it seems that religion and science don't jibe, I assume that it's because I have an incomplete understanding of one of those things, or both. Right? If there's something in religion which seems to defy science, either I don't understand religion well enough or I don't understand science well enough. And that pushes me to keep learning in both. And I think any Judaism that pushes you to discount verifiable, observable, scientific fact and events is, I think, a perversion of our tradition. And so I wouldn't necessarily encourage that. I think that's what I like about Judaism, is because it has always encouraged scholarship and understanding. Maimonides, one of our greatest scholars, I mean, he had his weaknesses and his flaws. He was a big fan of Aristotle, for one thing, and misled us a little bit there. But he was a scientist. He was reading Aristotle. He was a philosopher, a scientist, a physician, and had a lifelong mission of reconciling his faith with the reason that he was learning from the science that he was studying, and Greek philosophy and things like that. And so that was his purpose, was to say, like, look, both of these things are true. They have a different kind of truth, and it's my job to kind of reconcile these two things, not assume they're irreconcilable. And I think that's been a Jewish trend for a long time. People, I don't like bragging, but people always throw out that statistic about the disproportionate representation of Jews within Nobel Prize winners for scientific pursuits and things like that. Let's see. Kathy says, Rabbi, thanks for the Passover barbecue invitation. I think I'm going to grill for Passover. I'm going to grill something for Passover. We eat a lot of hot dogs during Passover, so there certainly will be grilling going on. Let's see. All right, and just one last thing I want to note out. Somebody brings up 18 seems like a special number. You see the number 18 appear in Jewish settings all the time, often in charitable denominations, and so sometimes you'll look at Jewish programs. Excuse me, let me start over. That's the benefit of live, is you get to hear me burp. Sorry about that. Excuse me, please. Miriam from New Hampshire observes that we often see the number 18 in Jewish settings. Sometimes there will be... Here we go again. Sometimes there will be tickets for concerts, and they'll be $18 or $36, or you'll get a pledge card that says, would you like to donate $18, $36, $54, $180, all of these things, denominations of 18. Where this comes from is that all Hebrew letters have a numerical value to them. Back in the day, before the sort of universal standard was using Arabic numerals to do math, many cultures used letters in their language to represent numerical values. Roman numerals are probably the most famous example of this, but we also have Hebrew numerals where Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, Gimel is 3, and so on, and some of them rack up into like the hundreds, but we have ways of making numbers using Hebrew letters. If you take the Hebrew letters that make the number 18, one is Yud, and Yud is 10, Chet is 8, and when you put Yud and Chet together to make 18, or rather in the reverse, Chet and Yud, it spells Chai, which means life. And so when we make, and people have little necklaces or pendants sometimes that have Chet and the Yud together for Chai, celebrating life. This is a religion and a people who celebrate life. And so when we make donations or we do things with numbers, we often like to put that spirit of life into them. And so to represent Chai or life, we'll make donations in denominations of $18. Not for nothing, the regular membership of the Jew Curious School is $36. So that's, you might have been wondering about that. And Miriam shares, yes, this is related to the 18 minutes max for unleavened bread as well. It's also 18 minutes is your buffer for lighting Shabbat candles. Whenever you see Shabbat candle lighting times listed, they are not precisely at sundown. They are 18 minutes before what would be sundown according to Jewish law. And so that's why when you're lighting candles, it's often still light out. This is just an acknowledgement that human beings sometimes make mistakes and often have busy lives. And sometimes you can't get those candles lit right at the time you're supposed to get lit. So instead of saying, light the candles precisely at sundown, God forbid you make an error and light a fire on Shabbat, we set the candle lighting time 18 minutes before sundown, and you have a little bit of leeway there just in case you make a mistake. So again, this is a faith and a people for human beings. And if you're going to do anything for human beings, you need to make it at least a little bit fault tolerance. Listen, everybody, I've really enjoyed learning with you today. Thank you for listening to this lesson. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your questions. Once again, we're about a week out from Passover, so I highly encourage you to find a place to go to a Seder. And if you can't find a place, there are many organizations that can help you. If you're in Los Angeles, I know the Miller Introduction to Judaism program is running kind of a Seder matching service, looking for seats that are empty and looking for people who need those seats. And also, I'll reiterate, don't be shy about asking somebody if you can go to their Seder. We have a convention of etiquette in North America where people feel rude inviting themselves to parties, and sometimes hosts think that's rude too. Passover is different. Passover is not that kind of party. Part of the Seder, we say, this is the bread of affliction. All people who are hungry, please come and eat. And so if you invite yourself to somebody's Seder, don't think that that's rude. Please don't think it's rude of them if they say no, if they legit don't have another chair to seat you in. But that's just kind of this openness and this give and take, because it's a mitzvah to have somebody for Passover to feed them. And so by asking somebody if you can go to their Seder, you're actually doing them a favor in case they have room to fulfill that mitzvah. So everybody find a Seder if you can, or reach out to a synagogue or a university if you can't, because this is something that I think is really important for us to do together every single year, sometimes twice. I want to give a big, I want to give a big heart-swelling expression of gratitude to all the people who have joined us for the live studio recording today of this podcast. And most of all, I want to thank you, Hero, for listening to the Jew Curious Show. It's been my honor to share what I have learned with you today. I hope you got something out of it too. If you have, I highly recommend that you subscribe to this podcast. If you look at your podcast listening device, there's usually a little button or a picture of a button that you can tap. And if you do that, you will automatically download all future episodes of this podcast, as well as have ready access to the archive of more than 30 shows we've done so far. Some of these are solo shows, just me talking. Some of them are me talking with our live studio audience here on YouTube. Some of them are great interviews with my friends and teachers and people who I've learned from and want to share their learning with you as well. So this podcast is a good one to subscribe to if you are even mildly Jew Curious. I also want to recommend that if you want to connect with people just like you, a good way to do that is through the Jew Curious Community Center. All you have to do is go to jewcurious.show/JCC and sign up there, and you'll get info on how to join a private Facebook group that is lovingly tended, carefully guarded and troll-free, just to make sure you feel completely comfortable hanging out with Jew Curious people just like you. You can share your concerns, share your struggles, share your story, and share support with people who are also going through struggles or just have questions. Whatever you have learned, you are invited to share with other people there. So to get connected there, go to jewcurious.show/JCC, as in Jew Curious Community Center. Once again, hero, I am overwhelmed with joy and gratitude that you have learned with us today. And until next time, peace. All right, everybody, I'm going to hang out here for a second. Really appreciate, let's see, the hand. The discussion was blasting. No, Kathy, Carmen, Miriam. Let's see who else is here today. Ari, thanks for sharing. I know there's a little bit of chat going back and forth. Some people, so I just want to acknowledge, like, some people feel super comfortable at Chabad. Some people don't feel as comfortable at Chabad. And I just want to say this has nothing to do with you and everything to do with Chabad. And I'm not knocking Chabad. I think they do incredible work in the world. And I have Chabad rabbis who I count as friends and mentors. But I also acknowledge that Chabad has a very specific mission in the world of reaching out to people who are already Jewish. Their goal is to help people who are Jewish to experience Jewish life more fully. They are not tasked with bringing people into Judaism and are very reticent. I've heard of people converting through Chabad. Usually they have some sort of blood connection to Judaism as it is before they'll even consider it. So again, Chabad does some of the most amazing outreach and educational work in the Jewish community, but it's not for everybody, right? And they'll acknowledge that, and they'll let you know, like, I get a lot of students in my Introduction to Judaism program who started out learning with Chabad because Chabad teaches some amazing Torah. But then when it came time to convert, Chabad says, we don't do that. And so they look for other avenues because they're drawn to Judaism, just not how necessarily Chabad does Judaism. So I say that, again, not to criticize Chabad at all, but to acknowledge that, because I saw this in the chat today, and I see this in the world all the time, some people have a fantastic experience with Chabad, and some people have a really off-putting experience with Chabad, and both of those things can be true, and you don't have to argue with each other about it. But most of all, I just want people to understand, if you have a bad experience with Chabad, it's not about you. It's about Chabad, and they have specific rules that they follow and a specific mission that they have. So I don't want you to feel judged or rejected. Again, this is entirely their ground rules that they play by while they're doing the great work that they do. And just understand that there's lots of different ways of doing Jewish, of being Jewish. As one of my Orthodox teachers, Rabbi Brad Hirschfield, says, there are as many ways of doing Jewish as there are people doing it. And some communities accept those ways and some communities don't. But just know that if one community rejects you, it doesn't mean that you are irredeemable. It doesn't mean that you are pushed out of Judaism forever. It just means that you might have to find another door to open. So really want to thank people. Miriam asks, pigeons are kosher? Yes, technically. Would I eat one? Probably not. I mean, I'm sure, I don't know, I wouldn't pick one off the street in New York City or Los Angeles. Certainly not without washing it first. I mean, they're born with an oil slick after all. But yes, technically pigeons are kosher, and there are lots of birds in that family, doves and turtle doves and mourning doves, and I just can't think that there's a lot of meat on them. We have chickens today, so why bother? But anyway, yes, pigeons are technically kosher, but again, there's lots of stuff that's kosher that I wouldn't necessarily eat. So listen, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your learning with us today, and I wish you a Shabbat Shalom. Enjoy Shabbat Hagadol. Enjoy the last Shabbat before we get into Passover. I know people are out there cleaning for Passover right now. I have been busy and kind of put this off, but and got a bat mitzvah coming up this weekend. As soon as Shabbat is over, I'm going to take out the scrub brush, start getting rid of those crumbs, and doing a little over-the-top grocery shopping. So I wish you a peaceful Shabbat, and again, my great gratitude for learning with you today. Until next time, heroes, peace.